Hey, friends, welcome to episode 514 of the My 123 Cents podcast. I am your host, Kevin Huntsberger, joined once again this week by Chad Smart. Chad, welcome back to the show.
It's been a long time. I'm glad to be
Yeah.
back. Yeah, it's good to be here. And
I understand you, before we dig into our topic of nostalgia this week, you have something you want to bring up. I think more current day stuff.
more current day, yeah. And actually, before that, I'm going to have another. Before I'm going to have a pre-note to the pre-note for this
Okay.
conversation, just because I hadn't told you this yet either. But we were discussing before starting recording that yesterday, on the day that we record this, so Saturday the 21st, I drove all the way out to Ontario, California, and went to Creep Econ. It's Creep IE for Inland Empire. And part of the reason I went is I met Ethan Suplee from, you might know him as William, the guy who can't see the schooner or sailboat in Mallrats. And he was Earl's brother Randy on My Name is Earl.
Okay.
But he was also in Boy Meets World.
Oh,
And
yeah.
his father on that show was played by.
Beta time.
And so I got him to sign my DVD, and I had gotten Vader to sign it
Oh,
like
cool.
7 or 8 years ago. So when I handed it to him, I'm like, "Oh, I got your dad to sign this earlier." And he's like, "Oh, wow, that's really cool." And I got talking with him. I was like, I listened to the podcast Pod Meets World where they went over the episode with Vader.
Uh-huh.
And I was like, "Were you a fan?" He's like, "No." He's like, "My dad took me to a Hulk Hogan match once, but I really wasn't. I didn't realize how big of a star Vader was until much later."
Mm.
So, but Ethan Suplee is a very nice guy, very cool. So yes, a little wrestling tangent connection there, but
I
and
think didn't Vader do 2 episodes of Boy Meets World?
he did multiple episodes
Okay, I
because
thought I
there's
thought he was on more than once. So.
yeah, and there's one that was filmed at what we call the Pond of the Honda Center down in Anaheim, which was during a WWE um, house show, and so it's Vader versus Jake Roberts,
Okay.
and you go back to that. And on Pod Meets World, Bruce Pritchard was a guest on the show shortly after they reviewed that episode. So if you want to go
Oh,
back and listen to him talk for probably 5 hours, you can do that and tell you how great WWE is. So, but anyway, to your point earlier, yes, I had an epiphany watching SmackDown. And anybody that has listened to this podcast over the years, or if anybody has been here since the beginning of my 123 cents and reading the blogs, knows that I'm not the biggest WWE fan. And in fact, if I had to rank promotions, WWE is usually down on the list. But I finally realized part of what the reasoning is. And
because
it's
you're not fixed right.
no, it's because WWE takes one person and promotes them as the be all end all, and everyone else is below them. So I'll see if this makes sense. But in the 80s and early 90s, you had Hulk Hogan,
Yeah.
who was the top guy. In the early 2000s, you had Triple H. In the late 2000s to early 2010s, it was John Cena. Right now, it's Roman Reigns. And I skipped the Attitude Era because I don't think Rock or Austin stuck around long enough to really get that put, and Austin being injured as well.
Hmm.
And so it's like, you look at WCW where you had Flair, but you also had Sting and you had Luger and you had Dusty Rhodes. You look at AEW right now, you had Swerve Strickland on top, but you also had Bryan Danielson, you had Hangman Page. Like they can interweave these guys, whereas WWE, it is their main guy that kind of gets all the attention. And then especially I think right now with WWE, as we discussed, I think here on the show, the Bloodline storyline is like so separated from everything else on SmackDown. It's like you're either Bloodline or you're just the guys leading up to the main event. Does it make sense?
It does, and it's funny that you said that because I was going to actually bring it up for our topic this week, which is Saturday night's main event, and looking at the promotion for the one coming up in December.
Mm-hmm.
I went on to WWE's website and clicked on the Saturday night's main event link, and under featured superstars that I guess are going to be a part of this show, in order is Roman Reigns, Cody Rhodes, Bianca Belair, Liv Morgan, Seth Rollins. So I thought it was interesting that, even if you were going to try to make the argument that Reigns comes before Rhodes alphabetically, Bianca Belair should technically, if that's the logic that they were using, then Bianca Belair should have been. But I was going to ask you,
Yeah.
is this a modern day version of Hogan Savage, Hogan Warrior from back in the day when Hogan would go away, do his thing, and then come
Mm.
back and kind of take over? It's been an interesting anomaly with the Roman Reigns experiment because he spent that vast majority most recently as a bad guy or at least a
Mm.
tweener and not you know the face of the company. I kind of identify Cody as, even when Roman was around externally from the WWE,
Mm.
he seemed like the face, if that makes sense. Whereas
He's the
Roman was,
media
yeah, he's the
face.
media guy. Whereas, on WWE programming, Roman was still kind of getting that top billing.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't know if that's because Roman was working a lighter schedule, so they didn't. I don't know what
Hmm.
I mean, I know we know everything that goes on in WWE because we are internet wrestling commentators,
Right, right.
but I don't know what Roman's contract stipulations are when it comes to media. I'm assuming there is some media obligations worked into the contract because that would be extra work other than just showing up to do your job. But and I know the Miz uh, was kind of that in that position for several years when
Hmm.
um, when he was popular. But yeah, Cody is I think the more uh, media friendly, and because Roman being the heel for the
Hmm.
last few years, you don't send the heel out because you can't heel it up on local news or
Yeah.
you know radio interviews, but you send out the face to be the nice guy to try to get people into the show.
Yeah, and I was thinking the other day too, there was talk, or there is talk, that Dustin Rhodes' contract ends
Mm.
with AEW sometime in September as we're recording this. Would you want to see him stick around in AEW ROH? I know he's tag team champion with, I think, Sammy Guevara, and then six-man tag champs with the Von Erich boys. Um, is there enough meat on the bone for him to go to WWE again and not necessarily revive the Gold Dust character, but be a part of the bloodline? And you know that would be a true bloodline
Mm.
instance for Cody, or for Dustin. I almost feel like that ship kind of sailed though, in the build up to WrestleMania this past year.
I would agree. I think since Cody finished the story, there is no real need for Dustin to be there. And, Dustin never had success really as Dustin in WWE. It was Gold Dust. So if he came in as Dustin, would the fans take to it?
Yeah,
And I know in, his persona right now in AEW ROH is kind of a half Gold Dust type visual presentation.
yeah,
Um, which I mean is a whole another discussion. But yeah, I don't. I could see him going to WWE if they wanted to use him as a trainer, maybe down in
yeah,
NXT,
yeah.
and maybe and put him on TV sporadically. But I don't think we need the Rhodes boys to fight the bloodline.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to agree with that, and I even though he's champion now in AEW with the six man and the tag team,
Mm-hmm.
let's face it, he's in his early 50s, maybe mid 50s by now. He's still looks great, can get in there and perform, and does well. But again, when we talk about building those viable threats, those viable characters, um, I think that's kind of what has hurt Cody's reign so far. Is I don't view Solo Sokoa, and I don't think I'm not
Mm-hmm.
the only. Let me rephrase that. I am not the only one that feels that way. Obviously, I think that WWE hasn't really done a great job, especially now that Roman is back. Now you've got these two mega faces in Cody and Roman Reigns, and only who on the other side of the card is going to be that dominant heel that's going to step up and be a legitimate threat to the championship. Uh,
Jacob Fatu.
do you really think that, or are you just saying?
I mean, that's the online consensus. Like he's the one in the new bloodline that has the most aura, I would say,
I
presentation.
don't,
But
as a fan, I don't see it though. I mean, I get it from reading it online, but
mm,
the presentation again,
yeah,
when Roman and Cody, it's kind of like when Hogan and Savage were the mega powers, and they, ran through the Twin
yeah,
Towers and ran through, that Survivor Series that year where Hogan was handcuffed outside and Savage was getting his ass kicked, and then he comes in at the end and Hogan and they beat the three or however many are
mm,
left and even the odds and you know WWE's always been like, or not always, but primarily through our fandom, it's always
mm,
been the good guy wins at the end, and
right.
in WCW or NWA, Jim Crockett Promotions, it was always the bad guy, the Horseman, Ric Flair. Even though they would get their butts kicked, Flair was always the champ and would lose it for a little bit. It's an interesting dynamic, and I don't know exactly where I'm going with it, but I feel
Well,
like they could do more to make Cody feel more significant as the champion. I don't feel like there's no difference. It doesn't feel like to me whether he's the champion right now or
mm,
he is just the top baby face running around shaking hands and kissing babies.
yeah, and this is where my complaints with the storyline has been where after Roman left and Solo came out, and I think that's when they attacked Jimmy Uso, and he said losing has consequences.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think Solo had won a match since beating John Cena in Saudi Arabia. It's like Solo wasn't presented as, I mean, he was presented as like the muscle, but when it was a one-on-one, he was always getting beat.
Yeah.
And then you bring in these other guys who, it's that factor of what we always complain about. Like you can be big in another company, but when you come into, say, WWE, you have probably a majority of fans who aren't following you from that other promotion over. So you're just a guy until you are given a reason to care about them. And just putting them in the bloodline, simply being like, oh, they're bloodline. Like that doesn't really do much. And with Roman gone, it was kind of a case of where's Poochie? It's always been when's Roman coming back? If Roman's coming, oh, is he coming back at this pay-per-view? Is he coming back at that pay-per-view? And like you said, Cody also has not had any, he's had good matches,
Yeah.
but he hasn't had any credible challenger to make you think, oh, is he going to lose the title this time? Is it, is there that possibility? And also, Bloodline being basically NWO version 4.0, where every match ends with interference and, just beat downs at the end of SmackDown. It's, again, for fans that are new to wrestling, it's awesome. For fans that have been around since the NWO days, it's,
Right.
been there, seen that.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you. I think that those are some valid points, and
Mhm.
we're counting down to the upcoming Saturday night's main event. That is the meat of this week's episode, and kind of looking back at nostalgia, and I do wonder how much nostalgia is playing a factor here. Uh, when we were
Mhm.
kids back in '85, right after the very first WrestleMania, uh, in May of that year, we got the very first Saturday night's main event. Do you remember? I we've talked before about this, and I don't remember, when did you start watching regularly enough that were you aware that Saturday night's main event was a thing? Because back then you didn't have to have cable, you didn't have to have a satellite in the yard. You could watch wrestling on Saturday night at
Mhm.
10:30 Central Time, in place of Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, I believe it was the first time wrestling had been on network television and since the 50s,
Mm-hmm.
if I have my facts correct.
That is.
Um, yeah, we've mentioned that I started watching wrestling in mid to late 84.
Mm-hmm.
I had to watch WrestleMania 1 live, because we did have the satellite dish. But yes, Saturday night's main event I was aware of. Um, I think at that time I was watching Saturday Night Live sporadically. Like I wasn't
Yeah.
a diehard fan. Um, and so that's my question with bringing it back now is it's not going to be on Saturday nights when Saturday Night Live doesn't have a show. It's going to be in prime time. Is that a good thing, or do you think it should be kind of a late night Saturday? And also taking into account the difference in how wrestling is presented today versus back in 1985.
I think you're going to get that nostalgic feel with, I'm hoping, maybe the music, the graphics, the voice.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps I've read rumors that Jesse Ventura, that's why they brought him back recently, that he will be
Mm-hmm.
a part of this. If they make it, because I'm going to use what you said last week about SmackDown, live is better.
Mm-hmm.
You can't have a live wrestling show, at least here in the United States, starting at 11:30 Eastern time.
Yeah.
You could, but I don't know that there'd be a lot of people that would want to stick
You don't
around.
remember Shotgun Saturday Night?
And that's true. That is true. Um, so yeah, it'll have a different feel. But I also go back to the main event, which was kind
Mm-hmm.
of a spin-off of Saturday night's main event, where we got those primetime matches on a Friday night. So I don't necessarily think that aspect is going to be as much of a negative. But no, I do agree that it won't have the quite the same feel. But also, honestly, with it being on a Saturday night and in December, who knows from my perspective, I'm talking here, I will probably end up watching it later on Peacock. I don't know that I will sit and watch it live just based on whatever's going on in December.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but I do think that it's going to be a nice dose of nostalgia based on the trailer, if you will, that we saw for it. Um, if Jesse Ventura is part of this, if they use uh, obsession. I don't know what they'll use and what they'll
Mm-hmm.
do to give that feel, but I think that I know they tried to do this back 2 or 3 years ago. They were naming their house show events or their
Mm-hmm.
premium live events or not. What were they? What are they calling
House
them?
shows. This is
House
the house
shows.
show. Yeah,
They
they're
were
trying to make them
calling.
seem special.
They were branding them as Saturday night's main event. So but I think keeping it sporadic, like it was
Mm-hmm.
back in the day, every 6, 8 weeks on a Saturday night. It's good for the nostalgia purposes. I think even though it seems like wrestling is kind of oversaturated right now in the marketplace, I think that there's that appetite for nostalgia, and that would work. Uh, it would work for me as a fan committing to that hour or 90 minutes or however long it's going to end up being. Uh, like it was back in the day.
I was going to say, do you remember when they brought it back in 2006 and 2007?
Yeah, I, I'm trying to remember, and again, we go back to that talk we had last
Mm-hmm.
week of remembering things from '85 versus remembering things
Mm-hmm.
from 2006. I read that there were five specials that aired
So,
called Saturday Night's Main Event. I believe those were in prime time as well. The
mm-hmm.
only one I remember is with Stone Cold Steve Austin and JBL. They were drinking beer in the ring.
Oh,
I don't remember any of the matches. I don't know. I couldn't tell you anything else that happened. That's the only thing, my only takeaway. And I know obviously other things happened if there were five
yeah.
of those. What do you remember?
No, I'm with you because I looked it up to see how many they were and how long ago it was.
Mhm.
Because I couldn't even remember what years it had been. And the only thing, looking at the full lineups, I'm like, yeah, none of this registers with me. The only thing that I remember is Matt Hardy and Evander Holyfield having a boxing match. And
See, I don't even remember that.
yeah, well, I wish I didn't, but
But yeah, so going
mm,
back into, '85 when this concept is born, and for me, I don't think that they did a very, and I'm wondering if it's because, superstars, I guess originally it was still championship wrestling, but because it was in syndication and airing
mm,
maybe on another affiliate or an independent station, I'm wondering if they weren't able to promote Saturday Night's Main Event because I don't remember as a kid seeing, hey, join us tonight or tomorrow or next
no.
week for Saturday Night's Main Event. It was always getting that week's TV guide, and I would always flip to Saturday to look and see, and they would usually have a little uh, ad
Ad picture. Yeah.
in TV guide, and that's how I knew most of the time
No.
that Saturday Night's Main Event was coming on. again, if the younger folks are listening, this was
That's
way pre-internet, and so that's how everybody.
how you
I
knew.
think everybody got TV Guide. You know,
Yeah.
they paid that subscription and got the little TV Guide in their mailbox every week. So that's how I knew it was coming on.
Yeah. And sometimes you get it and the name label would be starting to peel, but you don't peel it off because that rips the magazine cover. We can't have that. And if you get that reference, props to you.
Yes.
Um, but it's funny you mention that because this is how I found out that I always thought Saturday Night's Main Event was live because I'm an idiot and I was like 10 years old. This is how I found out it wasn't because I was watching one of the syndicated programs the night that Saturday Night's Main Event was going to be on that night. It was going to be the Hogan or the Piper, Mr. T. Um, did they have a boxing match on Main Event or they had like some confrontation? I think it was leading up to
It was
WrestleMania 2.
okay. Yeah.
Um, and so I'm watching whatever syndicated program it was, and Mean Gene was in the event center or the control room, and
Hmm.
he's like, as we saw on Saturday Night's Main Event, Roddy Piper took a belt and beat Mr. T, and I'm like, how did this happen when it hasn't even happened yet? Like, so that's how I found out Santa Claus wasn't real.
So yeah. So they yeah.
So I don't know
Every
if that
once in a
was
while,
a issue with the scheduling of it, if the wrong episode got aired, or if they just their scheduling didn't line up with when it was supposed to
yeah,
air. Yeah.
an oopsie there for sure. But yeah, that was and usually, I mean, always you were getting better matches than you were getting on the syndicated
Mm-hmm.
programs, and there was usually they would start off hot, obviously because 11:30 on the East Coast, 10:30 in the Midwest. Kids like us are staying up late and trying to watch it all.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're going to start off with Hogan or Savage or Warrior or Piper or whoever, and then usually the last match or two was more of an enhancement match or
Mm-hmm.
lesser things happening on the card. But gosh, I just remember setting the VCR, recording it. If I knew I wasn't going to be home or if we were going out that night as a family, would record and make sure that I was going to catch it all. And I saw an ad online for something the other day that you can plug into a VCR and plug into a computer. And so
Mm-hmm.
my dad still has a VCR. I'm going to buy this device, and I know I've got some old, which I know I can go watch them now on Peacock and whatever. But I just that nostalgia of watching it on those old tapes and
With commercials.
with commercials and seeing those things and just remembering that time frame, man. It just puts me in a happy memory place because obviously it takes you back to when you're more carefree and worry free
Mm-hmm.
and again it's that nostalgia of
Mm-hmm.
of being able to suspend your belief, not wondering or worrying about what the internet wrestling community is going to say, not having things spoiled. So many great memories and stories that started
Mm-hmm.
or that were a part of Saturday Night's Main Event that built into the syndicated and then led to pay-per-view matches as well. Do you have anything in particular, like when you think of Saturday Night's Main Event, is there an end-all be-all angle or match or moment or moments, memories that kind of you associate and tie with it, with notwithstanding the
Mm-hmm.
2006 to 2008 era of the program?
Yeah. I mean, obviously, the steel cage match where Paul Orndorff's feet hit first,
Mm-hmm.
and he should have been champion, but that Orange Goblin Hulk Hogan had to politic and say that doesn't work for me, brother. So got that title back.
Yes.
The battle royal where Andre headbutts Lanny Poff, headbutts Hogan in the back and busts him open.
No, that he busted Lanny open.
Was it Lanny? Okay,
Yeah.
I thought he busted it, but that and then one that has nothing to do actually with the wrestling, but I remember our VCR had been broken and we got it back from the repair shop, and my dad had hooked it up, and I think this was when JYD was facing Terry Funk on Saturday Night's Main Event, and so um, uh, I had a TV in my room and I was watching it, and my mom called me into our living room. And it's like, is the VCR hooked? Again, I'm like 11 years old. I'm like, is the VCR hooked up right? And I'm looking at it, it's all like snow and static, and I'm like, does it look like it's hooked up right? Yeah, that's the last time I talked back. But I was like, I want to get back and watch JYD and Terry Funk. I don't care about we can hook the VCR up tomorrow. So
Was that the one where uh, Dog Brands Jimmy Hart pulls his pants off and gets his?
probably,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was
And then of course the skits, the Halloween episode,
yeah. I
and
think that I think as a from a fandom perspective, '87 is probably the best year for Saturday Night's Main Event. It's a great year for
mm,
wrestling too. I think as far as the Hogan Andre story and the formation of the Mega Powers
mm,
later that year on Saturday Night's Main Event. It just man, it just hits the feels. But I was also thinking back and looking back at some of the older episodes too, and they always did the little introduction at the beginning, and I think
mm,
that's what made it kind of stand out and different as well. And it later explained that Bobby Heenan would come on and say, "I'm Bobby the
yeah,
Brain Heenan, and here are my brain busters," or whoever he was
mm,
managing at the time, or you know Randy Savage or whoever it was. They would always kind of introduce themselves because they are trying to catch that either lapsed fan or grab a new fan who was
mm,
coming to watch Saturday Night Live, and instead
yeah,
this is on and these larger than life characters, and maybe it got people curious enough to keep watching. And we talked about it before, how that main event on a Friday night in February of
mm,
'88 with Hogan and Andre attracted an audience that set a record for a long time uh, for broadcast television, wrestling on broadcast TV, and it being the first time in prime time. But I think obviously the strategy worked. Vince McMahon having that vision and working relationship with Dick Ebersol and NBC. And I wonder, was it just Vince McMahon's vision, or what other factors do you think came into play here where we didn't see guys from Jim Crockett Promotions, for example, or the UWF, the AWA? Those guys weren't utilizing, or they weren't able to get into that prime time or that even that network television slot for many many years.
yeah. Well, I would say, if you look at like UWF, WCCW, I think that's just more of a location
Hmm.
aspect. Whereas Vince being in Connecticut next to New York, probably an easier, hey, let's grab lunch type situation. I mean, obviously, Bill Watts or Fritz Funner could have flown up to New York or LA, but but I would say what's bigger, more surprising, and I know they did do a little bit with learning the ropes, but why, once Ted Turner bought Jim Crockett, why didn't he try to incorporate something with TBS
Yeah,
or, the other station? I don't know exactly when TNT was founded. I think that was like early 90s, but,
yeah,
um, why didn't they do something? I know they did the Cable Ace Awards when the NWO was popular. They had Hogan, Nash, and Hall trying to sneak into the Ace Awards,
oh,
but I mean that just came off as like really cheesy and kind of undermined what the NWO
yeah,
was, you
right.
know. But yeah, it's and I think for all his faults, and of which there are many, I'm sure we'll find out more this week when the documentary comes out.
Yeah,
Vince McMahon though had that vision, and if it wasn't for that vision, where would we be today with wrestling?
right. Yeah, it's a great point. And I often, I was thinking about it too. Saturday Night's Main Event premiered in '85, and the first Clash of the Champions, which was another primetime wrestling show that aired on cable, but it was something different, and it was more of a pay-per-view quality.
Mm-hmm.
I think Saturday Night's Main Event, you could they were better matches than they were in syndication, as we said, and you were getting Hogan every time and Savage and those guys that we didn't see weekly, which I think also helped with the attraction and building to it. But I know that Clash of Champions originally was born out of a to combat WrestleMania 4, but I think that concept worked too, and I wonder if it could have been even more successful or more beneficial for JCP and helped them along if they would have
Mm-hmm.
developed that sooner in the process and not necessarily going on into the ranks of being on uh, broadcast television, but at least having something out there that is competing with on some level with the
Mm-hmm.
Saturday Night's Main Event craze, because back then wrestling was so red hot. And I do feel like, like you said, WWE enjoyed more of that mainstream coverage and attention versus the smaller promotions, the regional promotions, and I almost kind of view it as today's wrestling landscape where WWE gets the lion's share of the attention. AEW, is kind of like that JCP. I'm not going to say they're regional, but they're definitely, I don't think, getting that groundswell that WWE has obviously had for the last 60 years or however long it's
Yeah.
been.
And I think part of that is because WWE has been around so long. AEW's been around 5 years. They do have growth. And we've discussed before, AEW isn't trying to be WWE light. It's trying to set its own identity, unlike what TNA was for its first 15 years, where it tried to be, compete with WWE by being WWE.
Hmm.
But I think going back to the bigger point about, why didn't these regional promotions get the publicity that WWE? I think it also comes into carnyism. You know, Vince really didn't care about exposing the business, even though, back then it was still presented as real. And, it wasn't until I think it was 1989 when they were trying to bring SummerSlam to New Jersey, where he had to come out and say, no, we're not sports, we're entertainment, so that because of tax laws and,
Yeah.
and things. But, Bill Watts, Fritz von Erich, Great Vern Gagne, they're probably more protective of the business. So they didn't want to maybe necessarily put it on a network mainstream show and expose that it wasn't always on the up and up.
Hmm.
I know.
Yeah, it's a good point. Do you think with Saturday Night's Main Event, I mean, obviously we talked about the appeal of it being that attraction where we're not seeing it every week. So I definitely think if they're going to come back with this and make a run with this, it needs to be, 3 or 4 times, maybe 5 times a year at the most,
Mhm.
where it's not uh, oversaturating an already flooded market. And then
Mhm.
my other wonder is, will NXT be involved with this? Will this just be a Raw or SmackDown property? I'm curious to see what is going to be or who is going to be a part of this moving forward as far as the stories and
Yeah.
you know incorporating that into the mix.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, I believe, because the first one is going to be in December, which, if I am correct, WWE doesn't have a premium live event in December anymore.
Oh,
So is this kind of taking the place? So would it be something where do you scale back your PLEs to make Saturday Night's Main Event more of a focused show?
mhm.
And also, by being on Saturday, it's coming the day after SmackDown.
Yeah.
Should they keep the brand stories going, or is this a chance to maybe do some cross brand matches that theoretically we're not going to see the rest of the year because we have a brand split that we are never going to abuse and let people jump from show to show just whenever?
Yeah. That's a good point. So are you suggesting that this becomes just a once a year thing in December where there's not a PLE
No,
or
no, I would say I think you need to do at least two or three to have it be um, meaningful, I guess, because once a year just seems like a random.
yeah,
I mean, I don't know if that really makes sense because a lot of things are, WrestleMania is only once a year,
right.
but this is a little different in the TV landscape of things. So I would say at least two or three times a year. But when would you do it? Because obviously, I mean, doing it in December, I would think maybe even January would have been better and kind of start that build to Royal Rumble with
Hmm.
it because I believe Rumble is in February
Yeah, it's in
now
early February this year or
because
in
of the
2025.
NBA or NFL playoffs. Yeah. And then, I would have it be kind of a big four kickoff, maybe
Mm,
like or Royal Rumble, and then do one maybe in June, July to lead into SummerSlam.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I could see that making sense and it would definitely I think have the potential to reach more fans who aren't streaming and watching things on
Mhm.
regular, keep saying regular TV, but like broadcast TV. But the dynamic of TV and streaming and all that, it's changing, ongoing
Mhm.
changes, and it'll be interesting to see, as WWE grows the brand and the product and putting it out there. Obviously when we were 10 and 11 years old, we were loading a VCR up with a tape
Mhm.
and hoping that there was enough space on it to record the
Yeah.
show. Whereas now you have an infinite number of uh, shows to watch. Literally at the touch of a button, you could be on your car and watching it on your phone. So
Mhm.
those days never seemed to be a reality back when we were kids, for sure.
Yeah. And then the other factor, as you kind of mentioned, is do you load up the show with one big main event and then the rest are, preliminary matches, let's say, or do you make it a culmination of a lot of stories? And I guess that's, the way that they've been doing their PLEs has, with only 5 matches on a PLE, there's a lot of stories that are being told on Raw and SmackDown that aren't getting PLE time. So is this a place for those feuds to kind of get a bigger spotlight?
Yeah. Well, because right now, and again, we're still what, 3 months away,
Mhm.
uh, 2.5 months away. The website, WWE's website, has those featured players of Cody and Roman and Liv, who I think Liv is the Raw Women's Champion, and Bianca Belair
Mhm.
is on there, and Seth Rollins I think is on Raw too. So I gonna think, to answer your first part of that, it will be co-branded,
Mhm.
but what stories will they tell, and will they all wrestle? I do feel like back in the day, Hogan wrestled at all or most of them, or spoke or was, part of it in some
Mhm.
form or fashion. Because when we were kids, those syndicated programs, we didn't see Hulk Hogan every week and we didn't hear from him every week. So uh, that's why I think Saturday Night's Main Event became special as well, is because
Mhm.
you got to see Andre the Giant
Yeah.
wrestle, or Hogan, or, like we said, those guys that weren't in squash matches and actually
Yeah.
doing some story time. So it'll be interesting to see. Time will tell, as we like to say here. But do you think this would open the door for AEW or TNA or other current companies to try to get into, a Saturday night spot?
Mhm.
Is this something that should be exclusive to WWE? How does I think WWE influences a lot of what happens with
Mhm.
wrestling, and so does this hurt or hinder other companies trying to move forward and come up with ideas or programming? Because, like we said, WWE's been around 60 years, TNA's been around just over 20, so they
Mhm.
have that nostalgia factor, I think, a little bit. But obviously, AEW is going to struggle with that, I think, with just being 5 or 6 years old.
Yeah. Well, and you bring up a good point, and the question would be, does TNA play a part in Saturday Night's Main Event with the
Mhm.
current WWE TNA relationship? Could they do something? Hopefully not an invasion angle because those are played
Yeah.
out and lame. But do you bring Joe Hendry onto Saturday Night's Main Event? Do you bring Jordan Grace? Do you bring Nick Nemeth, who could be a huge star if he got a bigger audience? Uh, I don't know. I don't know.
Yeah.
And as far as AEW, I don't. I would hope it doesn't try to copy that because I think AEW has enough issues just with its own with 2 shows and a pay-per-view every month or every month and a half. So just focus on making those shows more meaningful to watch. And then once you get that down, then maybe you can bring in another show.
Mhm. Yeah, I definitely don't think this, like we said, if it's sporadic and made to feel special, it will be special. And I don't anticipate WWE not doing that. I don't think this is going to be a monthly or a week, obviously not a weekly thing, but
Mm-hmm.
uh, it'll be good to see what they do. I know college football, there are no games that week or on that night.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully they have a decent crowd size or, audience watching at home, whether it's streaming it or because I think it's going to be available on both Peacock and NBC
So,
that night. So I'm excited for it. I think it was uh, long overdue, and it's something that when I saw the rumors and I talked about
mm,
it, I think you're on the show that at that point they were still just rumors, and I wasn't going to really comment much on it. But then when
mm.
I saw that it was official, yeah, man, I'm all for it, and especially if they bring in like Jesse Ventura to do something, or again, holding on to some of those elements that made it so special and so good back in the day. Obviously, we won't have Vince on commentary, but I think Jesse and Joe Testator or someone along those lines would do a great job.
Yeah, I just hope they bring back the individual logos. For, you
Mm,
were talking about before about how they would start off with whoever's
yes,
wrestling, like talking, and they would have the green screen behind them with,
yeah,
like I think Andre's was like the giant
yeah.
handprint and all that. That's what they need to bring back. That's what's
I hope.
totally missing that. And hopefully that first show they pay tribute to the history and come back from commercial with a countdown and a wrestler waiting to do something once he gets to go. Yeah.
Yeah, talking and Carney before they officially are back on.
Yeah.
Well, Chad, is there anything else about I was going to try to do the abbreviation, and
SNME.
yeah, I'm like, I'm not confident I'm going to be able to do it without screwing it up. So, anything else about the show, the nostalgia, anything else you want to add before we wrap up this week's
I
episode?
mean, I'll wait and see. Given the history of the 2006 2007 episodes, and just where wrestling is now with Raw and SmackDown and NXT, I would say, do we need Saturday Night's Main Event to come back? I don't know. We'll see. Hopefully they know what they're doing, and hopefully it's not just something in the TV negotiations deals that says, "Hey, you have to do this show." Hopefully there is a plan in place, but we'll see. And hopefully maybe we'll just get the Bloodline show. It'll be
Maybe,
all Bloodline all the time.
maybe so. And
Tamina
it,
Snooker can finally make it back on TV.
who?
Tamina.
Oh, Tamina. Okay, I thought you said something else. All right. Well, for the folks listening to this, stick around for a special closeout here. But for you watching on video, I can't do it. But thank you either way for supporting the My 123 Cents brand. Stick around, and we will see you next time.